Important announcement before we dive in. We would love to hear from you folks, particularly on your podcast review platform of choice.
Particularly on Apple Podcasts. If the spirit moves you, we'd love to hear what the show means to you in the form of a nice 5-star review.
Yeah, if you've been listening to the show for a while and you like it, we would massively appreciate a little love in those review sections, comment sections, wherever you can access it. We would just love to hear what you think.
Toss a coin to your witcher, as they say occasionally. And it does make a difference. Just know this, folks. Every time you give us some of those stars in a review, our boss looks at a strange, occult, Necronomicon-esque spreadsheet and says, we'll give them one more evening.
And sometimes an angel gets its wings.
And on with the show.
From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. We're so glad you came over. Fellow conspiracy realist, good evening, humans, AI, and specters alike. We've got a special one for you tonight. It's for the spirits, the skeptics, and the Ghostbusters. It's a little gooey. It's a little gross. Ugh. It's a literal sticky subject.
It's on me.
Yeah, ugh. Yeah. It's we're finally doing something we talked about in a couple of previous episodes. We talked about star jelly, remember, and angel hair phenomenon, the weird stuff that falls from the sky series.
Oh, how could we forget? It was a golden time. It was a golden age in the history of stuff they don't want you to know. A couple weeks ago.
And we've talked about ghosts extensively on this show, and photography and the history of attempting to capture whatever it is that the spiritualism movement was so into all those years ago.
And still is. All of that stuff. The idea of capturing somebody's particular color that they emit that can only be captured with a certain photographic process.
Carillion photography, yes, I love it. And the idea of EVP, like that famous Michael Keaton film from way back when. We also, what we see here is a common theme, the idea of chasing some tangible proof of intangible spirits. And that leads us to tonight's exploration. What on earth is ectoplasm exactly? Here are the facts. I don't know about you guys, but I think we should dive in straight to the cool part. Ectoplasm can mean several things, but well, that's a bit of foreshadowing. But for now, maybe we start with ectoplasm in the paranormal or supernatural sense, the slime that covers, the breakout star of Ghostbusters, Slimer.
Yeah, and I mean, I have questions. I said that at the top, but how come the ectoplasm went from green to pink between Ghostbusters 1 and 2? It's never really explained.
I wouldn't know. I just learned it when you said it now.
Yeah, the slime, and you don't know Ghostbusters 2, the slime that flows.
I do, but I don't know
the
colors. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ben. I always forget. Yeah, well, it's true. The slime in Ghostbusters 2 is pink, and they don't really differentiate it from the slime in Ghostbusters 1. So it's a little bit odd. Just kind of an odd contribution to the lore without really much justification.
Oh, so not the slime on the character Slimer, but the actual
Slimer's still Slimer, but he's barely in Ghostbusters 2 if he's in it at all, I want to say. But it's like slime fills the sewers of the city and starts, oozing out of everything. And Vigo the Carpathian, I guess, is responsible, but it's an entirely different kind of ectoplasm.
Oh, wow. I can't remember if it has anything to do with actually conjuring any of the ghosts, or do the ghosts come out of it, or is Slimer being made out of slime somehow ectoplasm?
It's like a byproduct, right? Of a supernatural encounter.
Yeah, in Ghostbusters 1, we'll get this out of the way quick. In Ghostbusters 1, it's always bugged me. They don't have a huge backstory for Slimer, but in Ghostbusters 1, I believe as Gozer, spoiler, is coming to end the world, more spirits are gathering. And then in Ghostbusters 2, when Vigo the Carpathian, the scourge of Moldavia, or the sorrow of Moldavia, the scourge of Carpathia, or whatever, when he's
the
coming
grumpy
back,
guy in the painting. Yeah.
right? When he's coming back, they discover this huge river of ghost goo, and that can be charged with positive or negative energy, and then that also brings back a bunch of ghosts. We have spoiled Ghostbusters.
It is representative of what we're talking about today. And I guess maybe they go more into detail with the ectoplasm in Ghostbusters 2, because you mentioned the positive and negative charge, and they actually like experiment with it and stuff. And in Ghostbusters 1, it's much less of a plot point. But in 2, it really is a big deal because they find that river. Stuff seems to emerge from it. In 1, it's more of an afterthought, something that you get stuck all over you when a ghost, you get slimed. That was sort of the joke, right? I've been slimed.
Yeah. Do you guys not like my immediate thought when I hear ectoplasm now is of South Park?
Of course, creme fraiche, right?
No,
isn't that the episode? No, but the one where he's covered in ghost goo, like with Randy. I thought it was the creme fraiche episode. I'm wrong.
Oh, maybe it is. Maybe it is. I think of whatever it is. Back in the day, I think it's season 12. Like 08, maybe 09. And it was, that's what I think of now every time I think of ectoplasm.
It was a spooky ghost.
It was.
It's weird because the term dates back pretty far. It was 1913 when a French physiologist named Charles Richet, Richet, came up with, or he used this to describe something paranormal. It comes from the Greek. For all our etymology nerds, it's a portmanteau of the two words ectos, meaning just outside, and plasma, which means anything molded or formed. So outside, molded or formed. And this was a huge deal. It reached its heyday in popular culture, or its evening, during the movement of a pseudo-religious thing called spiritualism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And we're going to have an episode on the rise and fall of that movement in a future evening. I think either, I don't know, it might be here, it might be Ridiculous History, because it's one of those Venn diagram explorations.
Oh, yeah. We did do something on that, though, recently, Ben, I swear, where we talked about the methods of kind of the hacky kind of methods that were used to take people in with mentalism, and some of the tricks that were used, like in the tables and the Pepper's ghost illusions and things like that. I cannot recall, though, which show we talked about this on, or what the nature of the episode was, but it's all kind of fresh. But I'm glad that you mentioned the origin of the word, because in my mind I was thinking of another term that's been in the news a lot lately, is like ectopic, the idea of like an ectopic pregnancy. And I'm glad you have officially taken all doubt out of my mind that those words are related, that it is just about something that happens outside.
Yeah, ecto, as in something occurring outside. In this paranormal context, ectoplasm is what the three of us have been talking about here, a mysterious substance that is manifested by individuals with some sort of extrasensory ability, most notably mediums, specifically physical mediums who commune with the dead, or sometimes completely non-human, incorporeal spirits, which is an interesting thing because these mediums were, for the most part, they were saying we are in communication with a dead human being, but they would also sometimes be talking to a sentient thing that did not exist on the mortal plane, which I thought was fascinating. It's a weird trip. I didn't know there were other categories of ectoplasm. There's teleplasm. That's when the medium is emitting ectoplasm at a distance, like across the room, or in some stories, in a totally different locale. And then idioplasm. That's when the ghost goop molds itself into the likeness of a person. You know what I mean?
Yeah, or just some other, a face, an entire body in some cases. And it's weird stuff too, because I like this idea of teleplasm, like just shows up in different places, because you can read stories, and they are stories, let us assure you, of this stuff, whatever it is, and we're about to describe it, showing up on the medium, on, like you said, Ben, across the room, on the table, underneath the table, in the belly button, in the face. It's just weird.
In the butt.
Oh.
No. If you must. You guys remember that line in True Detective season 1 where where Rust Cole says, "I smell the psychosphere," and then his partner thinks he's saying he smells a psycho's fear. And for the longest time, I thought that was because the subtitles say that, but psychosphere is a thing that refers to, it's like the sphere surrounding psychic energy and reality around the earth. And I think that term psychoplasm, Ben, that you mentioned, probably pertains to that. The idea of this being some sort of byproduct of this sort of clustered bubble of like supernatural energy, I guess, right?
Yeah. Tripping the light fantastic, right? Going from everything that science tells humanity, death is a one-way street. Right. And from the idea of scientifically exploring allegations of the afterlife and the paranormal, you would want, as a scientist, physical, reproducible, measurable proof, something tangible of returning from beyond death. And so ectoplasm, or ecto, as the cool kids called it, not to be confused with ecto cooler.
I miss that stuff.
It was for many people, many very intelligent people, it was considered the smoking gun of the afterlife, of proof of something beyond the physical plane. And if you can see pictures of this, and as you were saying, Matt, you can read all sorts of stories and anecdotes. And when you see the photographs, it maybe we're spoiled in the world of special effects and CGI, but it doesn't exactly take your breath away. It's kind of a gauzy substance, and usually it comes from some orifice of the medium's body, and it's cool because it's like it's like a symbiote suit in comic books, right? Like the Venom symbiote. The idea is it coats the spirit, right? Like a translucent mech.
Well, it's almost like it is the medium, the physical medium through which the spirit plane can enter this realm. Like that's kind of the idea. I was trying to come up with a metaphor. I don't have one. I don't know if you guys have been thinking about it, but like
ghost lube.
Well, almost, but the idea of you need to be covered in this stuff in order to get through a barrier of some sort.
I know. There's this stuff that people like stunt actors, when they set themselves on fire in movies, they coat their skin with this particular type of material that keeps the fire from actually touching them. It's like the reverse of that kind of, I guess, in a way. I mean, you know.
I think that jibes, that tracks. There's also, from the idea of tangible manifestation of otherwise invisible energy, you could think of the way that you can see sound waves by vibrations in sand. Like if you've ever seen that experiment where there's a disc of sand and then people start playing sounds and you can see the waves of sound. Yeah. You can see the waves of sound reflected there.
I think between those two, we pretty much got it. Yeah, because it is. I see what you're getting at, Matt. It is something that's a little hard to put into words because it's like it's almost like a spacesuit in a way. It allows you to traverse a particular boundary that you should not be able to exist in. Like it's almost like without this stuff, the ghosts either couldn't make it, the spirits couldn't either make it into this realm or this plane, or they would perish in some way,
or they couldn't be perceived.
Yeah, that's the other thing. The other thought is that when one of these beings, otherworldly, spiritual, ghost, whatever, when they show up in our physical realm, this is what they leave behind.
What they're wearing that allows them to be perceived at all, too, right?
Like their fingerprints, or the way that you can see human oils after flesh touches glass. It's kind of a residue, and then like to make I'll dumb it down because I think this is the dumbest example I could think of. It's why people throw sheets over Ghost. Right?
100%.
The laziest ghost costume in the history of Halloween. Now that you have the sheet on, you can see the thing.
Yeah, or like there's a whole big sequence at the end of It Follows where they're like in this school swimming pool, this gym, and they have to follow the ghost around. They keep throwing stuff over it so they can like track it, and then they shoot it. Because I guess you can shoot ghosts in modern movies.
It's interesting that we're describing it as gauzy because that is where like that is how it has been described a bunch. But there's almost another version of it that is more, and you described it as lube, Noel, but almost as a lubey substance, almost translucent, slightly white. Hesitating talking about other excretions of the human body here because that is kind of the way it's described in other instances.
Milk going bad, almost. It's like an off-dairy product. Yeah, because
what's that gross Japanese fermented soybean, Ben? Natto.
Yeah,
it has kind of that tacky, like it gets stuck on your fingers, you know. And by the way, I was saying lube not to be gross, but just the idea of it helps you get through something. It's like it is a protection that kind of helps you navigate a tight boundary. Now it sounds like I'm being grosser.
Well, no. You know, if somebody thinks it's gross, then maybe it's time for you, fellow listener, to take a self-inventory because there are all kinds of lubricants. Now I just made it weirder.
Spiritual lubricants.
I'm bringing up milky patches there because that is the phrase that Charles Richet, the guy who coined the term, used when he first started describing ectoplasm in a paranormal sense. He began by observing a physical medium named Eusapia Palladino, very cool name, and her ectoplasmic projections were, to him, white veils and milky patches. So he called them examples of ectoplasm. And because every scientist is at heart a doubting Thomas, people wanted to touch this. They wanted to engage with it, to take samples, right? And to analyze those samples, which gets tricky later. But we have accounts of people that you would consider otherwise skeptical who totally believe this. And you can read firsthand accounts of them saying, I visited a medium, they extruded ectoplasm, I touched it. It's cool to the touch. It was viscous. It was slimy. And everybody was on board.
Yeah. And we'll get into the reasons why it might be so slimy, but also somehow, look like a gauzy, almost cloth of some sort. But it is really sticky and wet because of maybe where it's been.
And that's interesting, too, because a lot of historical burials involved like shrouds and kind of gauzy coverings that would be placed over top of the body. I don't know. It's just an interesting connection. I'm not saying it's like means anything necessarily.
People totally leaned into it because at least part of this was branding.
Yeah. Because, again, we have a ton of proof of the existence of this stuff. I don't want to spoil it right now, but this is sort of there's a lot of lore wrapped up in this and a lot of like historical telephone. I think those early burial traditions may well have played a part in what people have described as having seen.
There's another aspect here. Folks like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is famous for a couple of other things. He was also big into the investigation of ectoplasm and mediums and spiritualism. He worked with a medium who was identified as Eva C. Her full name, Eva Carrere, but at first he was just calling her Eva C. He touched ectoplasm this medium created, and he said, holy smokes, jeepers, you guys. That's what he said. He said jeepers. He said this feels like a living material, right? I'm not just touching something cool to my fingers. The tactile sensation alone is not the end of the story. This is moving and responding to my touch. This thing, whatever it is kind of like a gunkier version of T-1000 in Terminator 2. It's changeable. It's mercurial.
Also reminds me of the black goo from the Alien films that has sort of a sentient quality to it as well.
Yeah, or X-Files, the black oil goo stuff. That's very interesting that Arthur C. Clarke, that Arthur Conan Doyle like touched it and he did like write about it. And it's a weirder thing than even I'm imagining when I'm looking at these historical photos, at least for this episode, where we'll get into those and like what those look like specifically and why there's some weirdness with the photography going on there and the experiments and the quote controls and all that stuff. But that's very interesting to me. Because it would be, I don't know, as a writer like that, if that were real and that were true, or if you wanted people to believe it was true, you could come up with some very compelling stories.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, also, he's the creator of Sherlock Holmes, right? And one of the mortal sins in writing fiction is to write a character who is the smartest person in the room, because it's so difficult to do. No, it's true. I mean, think about it. Every time you see a super smart character that isn't actually behaving as though they are super intelligent, it's because the smartest character in the room can only ever be as smart as the person writing that character, which is, it's just tricky. It's very difficult to pull off. So shout out to Sir Doyle himself. He wrote Sherlock Holmes, and he was still, for a time, very convinced about this ectoplasm stuff for a time. We also know that kind of like how star jelly decays, this stuff seemed to decay at first. It was like clear phlegm or snot. It was almost invisible. And again, under those conditions that we just teased a second ago, it would become gradually translucent, from transparent to translucent. And then it would start darkening and becoming more visible as the medium's connection to the spirit world intensifies. Some people said it would glow, kind of like bioluminescence from beyond the grave. But it only happened in low light. The problem with taking those samples is it would dissipate very quickly under exposure to light. Side note, also, we found a lot of people reporting that ectoplasm had a peculiar, strong odor, but no one seemed to agree on what that odor is. Like, there's not a single universally accepted description of the smell. There are just a lot of people saying it kind of smells. We're laying some really gross foreshadowing points here, folks. Now, this, like the brief history, as we're diving in, this can all sound somewhat ridiculous as we hear it laid out in this manner. No, I mean, it's crucial that we remember a lot of the proponents of ectoplasm and spiritualism, they didn't think this was woo-woo hippie stuff. They didn't think it was occult or in any way necessarily infernal. In their mind, this was a marriage of science and the spiritual world. The guy we mentioned, Richer, for example, he's a legit physiologist at this time. He later goes on to win a Nobel Prize for his work on anaphylaxis. So he's not just the ghost snot guy.
Yeah. Well, imagine there are rumors of folks down at this building somewhere downtown that are allegedly conjuring spirits with their methods and their boxes and their curtains and their seances. Oh, we need to get down there and investigate. Let's use scientific rigor to prove that this stuff's real. Because if it is, my God, this is world changing.
Yeah. Yeah. And these investigators, because that's what they were, these investigators and enthusiasts are good faith actors. The height of public interest in ectoplasm is inseparably intertwined with the rise and fall of spiritualism, which you don't hear too much about in the modern day, but people felt like they were on the cusp, the bleeding, goopy, gooey edge of a breakthrough that would fundamentally change human civilization. We're talking about the smartest people in the Western world. They were convinced that if they took modern methodology, right, the scientific method, they could understand and finally answer the fundamental questions of the human experience that haunt, poor choice of words, everybody listening tonight. What happens when we die? Does some vestige of the consciousness persist when the body itself becomes an empty house? It's a cool story, but is there anything to it? Yeah, I mean, sort of.
We'll get into that after a quick word from our sponsor.
Here's where it gets crazy. All right, fellow conspiracy realists, that is a little bit of a fake out. Ectoplasm is, it turns out, very, very real. Just not perhaps in the way the spiritualist hoped or claimed it to be. I think we could look at two genuine examples of ectoplasm, and maybe, do you want to just start with the most boring one? It's the one we can actually prove.
And for this one, let's go to biology. Ooh, let's talk more about ectoplasm, also known as exoplasm. What is that? Huh? Ben, what's exoplasm?
Right. Or ectoplasm. Matt, it's positively telepathic that you would ask that. It is, as any person who's awesome at biology mixers knows, the non-granulated, we're quoting here, the non-granulated outer part of a cell's cytoplasm. The counterpart, the granulated inner layer known as the endoplasm. So it's cell biology. It's kind of a bait and switch, because ectoplasm in the world of ghost means what we described before the break, and ectoplasm in the world of biology is a very real thing that is in so many cells, a innumerable number of cells. It's the outside goo.
Oh, yeah, it's like the cellular wall.
Yeah. And this was coined by a guy named Ernst Haeckel in the late 19th century. So it actually is a predecessor to the use of ectoplasm in the world of the paranormal. And he was super into this phrase as a way of describing unicellular organisms like amoebas. And just like you said, Matt, the real ectoplasm, it's both a shield and sort of a transit platform for all the stuff bouncing around inside a cell, which means that if you are a human or another form of organic life, you are absolutely riddled with ectoplasm. You are inundated with it. You are dripping and drowning in ectoplasm right now as you listen to tonight's program. I mean, don't think about it too much if you're a germaphobe or, you get squigged out easily. But it turns out we're all sort of Slimers.
Yeah, dude.
In our own way. The Slimer within.
Slimer within. Ghost is coming from inside the house. So that's the boring one, but that is the real ectoplasm we can prove. Do we want to talk about the more interesting? I don't know. Is this interesting or is this more of a downer?
It's a downer, but we got to talk about it. So to talk about this other real ectoplasm, we have to talk about some of the famous photographs. Just like if you go back to 1906, there was this thing called the instantograph bellows camera. And it is a camera that was used in some of the most famous photographs of alleged ectoplasm. And this is a pretty simple machine that uses a plate, a photographic plate that gets exposed when you expose the lens of the camera. And then you put it back, then you close it, right, after this plate has been exposed to light. And whatever light goes through that lens and hits the plate, that's what you get. Well, some of these plates saw stuff that if you just looked at the photograph and you weren't in the room, it looks, I'm going to say it, hella weird. It looks like this white, weird, gauzy, maybe clothy substance emanating from a medium's nose or a medium's mouth, who's just sitting in a chair, sometimes directly in front of a weird darkened box, sometimes directly in front of weird darkened curtains. Sometimes their hands are being held by other people off camera. Sometimes their hands are even like clasped to a chair or something so that they cannot interfere and create whatever this thing is. But man, it looks like it's just material like cheesecloth or linen, some kind of like really thin linen, or it looks like fabric to me, at least to my eyes.
Yeah. The second version of real ectoplasm, actual ectoplasm version 2, we're happy to say there were genuine physical substances present during those trances, those seances, other exhibitions of physical mediums at the height of spiritualism in particular. And we know that from photographic evidence, like you're mentioning there, Matt. The thing is, none of this stuff was ever proven, ever, in any case, without exception, to be anything other than mundane material with a heck of a lot of showmanship and performance. Eat your heart out, Vince Offer. Eat your heart out, Billy Mays. Do you guys remember who Vince Offer is?
I don't know Vince Offer, but I remember
slap
Billy
chop
Mays.
guy. Slap chop guy.
The slap chop. Yeah, with the garlics or the onions. Billy Mays was the Showtime, the rotisserie chicken guy, right?
I think that was another guy. Billy Mays is OxyClean.
OxyClean. But there was another guy that was like all about the rotisserie chicken. Cages.
Who knows? But
Ron Popeil. Ron Popeil. That was Ronco.
That's it. Yeah.
Ronco. Sorry.
Ronco.
Carry on.
I missed that halcyon era of made-for-TV commercials. The showmanship of these physical mediums was not too different because, like you were saying, Matt, teased it several times, in some cases, this ectoplasm, we know for sure, was straight-up cheesecloth. In other cases, it might be a fabric or textile of some sort smoothed up with potato starch, or it might be paper. It might be still cloth, but with egg white mashed into it instead of potato starch. Or it might be something I was not familiar with called butter muslin. Butter muslin. Pardon my accent. I'm still learning English. Not Muslim, muslin. Muslin. That's like a higher end cheesecloth.
Mm-hmm. It's that shroud material. That was what we were talking about earlier. That kind of transparent, translucent, rather textury kind of material that you'd see draped over, bodies and, historical kind of burial ceremonies.
Yep. And we're going to get into why sometimes it even looked like it was coated with egg whites or just biological material, because it was hanging out in somebody's stomach and or throat and or, sinuses. Ugh.
Yeah, it was in their holes.
Yep.
It was in their holes. And the story of ghostly ectoplasm is inherently, unfortunately, folks, it is a story of cons and frauds. And that was the stuff the vast majority of these mediums did not want their audience to know. It turns out a lot of these folks were quite adept at old school close-up magic, sleight of hand, and to understand how these conspiracies worked. Because conspiracies they were, we have to get our heads around two aspects of the con. And the first, and I think for all four of us with a love of film and cinematography, the practical effects are just amazing, because we got to talk about the case conditions. Just like a mentalist, right? Just like Darren Brown always has very specific conditions, or Penn and Teller always have very specific conditions. These folks were no different.
Well, yeah, it makes so much sense. You're going in to attempt to scientifically study something that has to occur under, as you said, these conditions where maybe for the medium to perform the act of connecting with the spirit world, they have to, let's say, get inside a specific box, like a human-sized box. Or let's say they have to have a table behind them with specific instruments on it, specific things and items on it. And there has to be a curtain that separates them from that box, which could be, hey, that's just how it happens. That's how this person does it. But it could also be a very calculated way to insert manipulation via either themselves or another person.
Mm-hmm. And all of these conditions, by the way, are non-negotiable circumstances.
I can't do this without my stuff.
It doesn't work in the light. You know what I mean? And the fact that you're questioning this means that you're a non-believer and you're kind of screwing up the vibe. So if it doesn't work this time, it's your fault.
That's it.
Harry
That's
Houdini.
Exactly it.
And that's kind of a conversation Houdini actually had with people. The manifestations often only occurred in very low light, very specific seating arrangements. And some of these conditions were placed on the audience as well. Like you would have to, I don't want to call these people rubes, but the participants were required to stay seated often, and they kind of had to, they kind of had a peer monitoring system because you had to join hands around the table. So you couldn't move your hands. You couldn't move your physical location. You could not change your perspective. You couldn't stand up and like walk behind the medium.
God, that's so important. Just the idea of perspective. And we know this from modern close-up magic, from any modern magic television show, right? Where we're watching illusions, Michael, on the television. The audience is in a very specific spot and with a specific, as you said, perspective. I think perspective is maybe one of the most important even words to imagine and think about when we're considering ectoplasm at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's one of the big parts of the next step in the con. The practical effect of the illusion is to make it seem as though the manifestation is coming somehow from or through the medium, appearing in the same vicinity as though, it just came in the room with you. That's fine. It's mids, you could say. You know what I mean? Like, it's disappointing.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of like if your parents got you a car when you turned 16, like, hey, we got you a car. And, oh my gosh, thank you, parents. And then they say it's a Geo Metro. And then you go, oh, well, I mean, it's a car.
At least it's not a Honda Odyssey.
Right. Yes.
Sometimes it's a Dodge Caravan, okay? And that's fine.
Sometimes it's a Gremlin. Or a rabbit.
Did you get a Gremlin?
No. I just meant, what's one of those like notoriously dubious cars of yesteryear?
Gremlin's bad. Pinto.
Yeah. That's the bad. That was the
Edsel.
lemon. Yeah, it's a Pinto.
So this was not peak showmanship. Peak showmanship was, as we were saying, to have that ghostly substance appear to extrude from the body. Now you've got your twitching, you've got your maybe some glossolalia, speaking in tongues, some ululations, all that kind of stuff.
I know the ones.
Yeah, eye rolling, and then like you're spasming, and all of a sudden coming out of your mouth, there appears ghost.
Yeah. Hardcore mode is if you can get the ectoplasm to emanate from the scientist who's there to study you, which I don't think it's happened yet.
What? Why?
I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah. Heck of a coincidence that. And here's the thing. I don't know. We teased it here. We should just say it for anybody who is wondering why we keep mentioning the shiny appearance. Why does this stuff look shiny? Because if you look at regular cheesecloth, it doesn't have a sheen. So where did it get this viscosity?
It's no sheen until you put it in your mouth for a while and roll it around and then spit it back out.
Ew.
Sorry.
That's true. Regurgitated. Just like a feeding a baby bird.
Baby bird. Yeah.
Which helps explain some of the spasms, right? Because you're flexing your diaphragm, Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Are these ectospasms?
These are ectospasms.
Hey. I'm sorry.
So this was a common practice, and people were doing this were quite talented at it. Credit where it's due. If you did not know the mechanics behind this and the show was good enough, you might, even if you're not entirely convinced, you might think, well, there's something going on. I don't know what it is. Until you see people who get busted, like a Danish guy named Einar Nielsen, who was exposed as a fake when he was caught hiding ectoplasma in his rectum.
Like cheesecloth?
Yeah, he boofed it.
Oh, okay. Well, that's one way to do it.
I feel like that's more difficult though, right?
Yeah, but
you can make yourself regurgitate, but how do you get it? Like, what's your sleight of hand at that point,
I don't know. Core muscles, just shoving it out of there. It's interesting because now I'm thinking about the interaction between stomach acid and cheesecloth, and I wonder if it had the ability to break down some of that a little bit, but probably not enough.
depending on maybe how long you kept it in there.
Yeah.
This is so weird and kind of gross. We know that we still haven't answered the question, that we're telling you some of the mechanics of the purported substance, but what about the idioplasm? What about the stuff that wasn't just milky patches or gauzy veils? What about the things that looked like people's faces or hands, suspended in the air? Is this your missing child? Things like that.
I don't know. They didn't have projectors per se back then the same way we have them. How could they have possibly done that? Photography, plates that have been double exposed. What?
Yeah, what you might call trick photography, right?
Yeah. Ghosts were not proven to exist at this point, but magazines were very much proven to exist, and scissors also existed. So it wasn't too difficult to cut out, like in the case of Ava C that we mentioned earlier. She was found to use magazine cutouts suspended in the air in the darkness with pins and carefully placed string, which sounds in the dark. Yes, that's the key part, in the dark. And it might sound like, low budget acts of chicanery, but we have to remember these practical effects are only one part of the operation. The second aspect is arguably more important and more dangerous and can be weaponized today. We talked about the physical perspective, but the key to really getting the grift to work was the psychological perspective. In a very real way, these mediums were manipulating intangible forces, but they were manipulating the minds and the spirits of the living rather than the spirits of the dead.
Yes. Oh my God. Do you guys mind really quickly before we get into this, the psychology, because that is absolutely the most important thing here. Just when it gets to the photography, when we're talking about those plates that I keep kind of mentioning, but not fully talking about, what you can do with those plates, if you expose them really briefly to something, like imagine someone in complete darkness, except for a small light that's illuminating someone wearing all white or being painted white even, or wearing a white mask or having white gauze all around them or lacy substances, materials. Imagine someone standing in the darkness, then you use your camera and you barely expose it to this light of this person in the darkness. Then you close it really quickly again.
Dude.
Then you take that plate and you transfer it into the place wherever you were going to take the photograph of, let's say, the medium or the person who was attempting to contact a spirit. Then you expose that one fully. You are going to have the literal light ghost of that previous exposure on that plate. And no one may be the wiser if they believe, at least, if you did a little bit of psychological work to make people think, oh, this is a brand new photo plate that I'm now opening and I'm placing into my camera.
Well, it's before people really were wise to a lot of that stuff too. I mean, right?
Yes.
Like in terms of now we know on Photoshop, everybody knows that images should all be, viewed with a grain of salt. But like back then it was a lot less, common knowledge.
Yeah, you need to study how photographs are made and how they work. You would need to be in a business or connected to a business likely that uses photographs for some purpose to have a full understanding of how the light actually, changes that plate so that it creates an image.
Yeah, that's a great point, because it's still rarefied air at this juncture in history, right? To the degree
we're
where
talking 1920s still, right. 1930s maybe.
There's still such a new car smell on the technology that even people who are seasoned professional photographers could be fooled, right? Because very few people knew the panoply of techniques available. And you could say, hey, I consider myself a pretty crackerjack photographer, and I can't explain this. It doesn't mean these people were in any way less intelligent than anyone. They just didn't have the same familiarity with a technology that's much more familiar to the average person today.
Well, and it's all about intent too. I mean, these are techniques that were employed in order to fool people. I mean, like I took a darkroom photography class when I was in college, and I have a picture hanging in my bedroom that I really like. Where I was in a dark basement with no lights and had a camera on a tripod and just opened the shutter for a series of exposures and lit a cigarette lighter and moved around the room. And in the image, there's like 6 of me, and it's really cool looking. But if you showed that to somebody in these days, they'd be like, "What witchcraft is this?" You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah, unless you were there to explain to people, to the
That's
observer, what happened. And that would defeat the purpose, as you said. That would defeat the intention of these mediums. And with all of this, and Noel, I love the point about the intention of the mediums and their colleagues or their co-conspirators. We talked about the practical effects and the importance of physical perspective. We're going to take a break to hear some words from spirits of our own, our sponsor spirits, and then we'll return with the other more dangerous perspective, the psychology. And we're back. Psychology 101 Grifter Edition.
So while it's certainly possible that a handful of these mediums truly believed in their abilities, again, that's something that we've talked about anytime this topic comes up. Like, they're not all grifters. There are certainly ones that like truly believe they have a gift and that they are sharing that gift with others and helping people. But then the vast majority of them are kind of hucksters and people that are trying to make a buck off of folks' insecurities and or, grief. And that sucks. But
there may be real mediums. We just haven't been able to prove it yet. There's
beyond the shadow of a doubt. There's no like unequivocal test for it, right?
Right. Yeah. And let's take a second there, because we were talking about this off air. So it can be a little bit confusing. The folks that we're speaking of here this evening are called physical mediums. And during the spiritualism movement, and even now today, with some of the instrument-free faith healing kind of things that you see, that's where someone lays on the hands and they pull out some gunk purportedly from a human being.
We have a whole episode on that.
We do. That's a kissing cousin of a physical medium. So a physical medium here is defined as someone who is like doorman in the Great Lakes Avengers. They're a portal through which physical manifestations of the spiritual can be seen.
Well, and therefore, especially since all the things we've said about what the idea of ectoplasm is, it makes sense that they might have some that would come out of their body, because they are literally, the ghosts or the spirits are passing through them, and that's where the remnant the residue, I guess, the spiritual residue might end up.
Yeah, and that episode, by the way, is called "What is, quote, laying on hands," unquote. If you want to look that up, it's from September 2020. But I interrupted you.
No, I think I got there. Just the point being is that we certainly aren't trying to say that anyone who believes that they possess these types of intuitions or skills are completely full of it. That's not what we're here to say or to prove or disprove, but historically the fact remains that a vast majority or a very large number of these folks purporting to have these abilities were doing just what I said, trying to prey on people and their misfortune. So think about it this way: your most ardent supporters are going to be people navigating a significant loss, a dead child, a dead spouse, dead parent, whatever it might be, and needing some kind of closure. And therefore, there's that just absolute opportunity for that confirmation bias. And if you know how to play into that, the cold reading of it all, that we see on these kind of Hollywood psychic type shows, which I think are 90% of the time absolutely bogus and manipulative, it's really easy to see how someone is very open to being manipulated in that way when they're already weakened. Their defenses are already weakened because of going through a trauma.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. As the old line from X-Files goes, they want to believe. And, this is very cold, but it's necessary to say, you can see the attempts at grifting folks just by the content of the purported messages. Very few returning spirits, for example, say stuff like, hey, I miss you, and I was bad, and now I'm burning in hell, right? Very few people give a terrible message about the afterlife. Very few people give specifics that could not otherwise be derived from the Sith level arts of hot or cold reading. And so long as you don't look, just like the photographs, so long as you don't look too closely at the method and the message of the medium, these conversations and experiences feel right. They feel reassuring. They're better than the silence of the grave.
Dude, did you guys see that movie from either 2020 or 2021 called Nightmare Alley with Guillermo del Toro?
Oh, so good. And the original is good too, guys. Like the actual 50s, I believe, version. It's incredible. But I like the Guillermo version too. But it's all about these kinds of things. Yes, it's fantastic.
It reminds me a lot of exactly what you're talking about, Ben, where it's just, it looks into the characters that are figuring out these techniques and figuring out, very complex versions to, it is to fool someone in order to make money, right? That's the idea. You fool an audience of people so that you can make their money. You put on a show. But it does make me wonder about, I don't know, not necessarily the motivations, because ultimately it is like a spectacle performance that you're going to watch the way you would if you were going to see a play or something, in my mind, at least in some ways.
Or for the more atheistic amidst us, gives you a similar kind of reassurance as a religious ritual would. I mean, it doesn't have to be evil, right? A panacea is not always given in bad faith. These blue sky pills of the mind, we could call them. And also, this might be kind of a hot take here, but I'm still not. Okay, so the physical, medium, ectoplasm, spiritualism stuff, I'm confident that we can say not easily 90+% of it is a bad faith grift, but I'm still on the fence about spiritual mediums. Like I'm still on the fence about vibes or, non-tangible, inexplicable messages and information and knowledge. I'm so on the fence about it that I am uncomfortable talking about it on air. We know that there were grifters because the message was always reassuring and always kind of hitting those dopamine triggers, right? Not only can I help you talk to this person that you miss so deeply and profoundly, but you can come visit them any old time you like. You can talk to them again and again and again, so long as you bring some coin along with you, which is just brutal. You know what I mean? Do you guys ever one example of very controversial people like this in the modern day would be that guy, John Edwards. Do you remember?
That's what I was kind of describing, I think.
Yeah.
Wasn't he? He's a TV guy, right?
He was, yeah. He was on Oprah, Larry King. He had his own TV show.
Well, I'm not going to name names, but I worked closely with a producer on some podcast stuff in the past who had a background in TV. In that exact kind of sphere that you're talking about, and worked with someone very similar to this fellow, and was absolutely disgusted by the whole thing, and just described it. And I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus or anything, and I'm not trying to be like, "Ooh, I have inside info," but this is a person who worked closely and saw these tricks being plied, and to be around a person like that who probably pretty openly, when people aren't listening and the cameras aren't rolling, talks trash about the people that they're manipulating.
Ooh, like the
Can you imagine?
Yeah, that's.
Can you imagine?
Unfortunately, I can. Yeah, it reminds me of like the televangelist or faith healers who have the little hidden earbud where they get information about people in the audience and then claim it's divine inspiration. I don't know. I mean, this shows us something strange about this period of history. There are several reasons the belief in ectoplasm is nowhere near as popular now as it was back then. And a lot of it is because the interested nerds who brought scientific principles to these seances ultimately proved the falsity of these claims. Our boy who coined the term ectoplasm in the paranormal sense, Richer, was once the president of a outfit called the Society for Psychical Research. They really wanted this stuff to be true. They wanted it to be true so bad. However, because they were scientists and they were trying to be objective, they were bummed out. Over and over again, they found sleight of hand, psychological manipulation, good old-fashioned grifting, and basic material science. Those were the things that, when combined in a certain recipe, created the appearance of ghost. And then they published it. They went, oh, there was a book burning. We didn't even get to that. This is a huge milestone, because these guys who sought to prove this stuff or investigate it and wanted it to be true, they just kept disproving it. And there was a book that was originally published anonymously called Revelations of a Spirit Medium. And it was like when a stage magician breaks the big code. Is there like a magic code where you're not supposed to explain the tricks? Right? Isn't that?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And like, you know, at the Magic Castle in Los Angeles, which is like a private magician's club, no photographs are allowed inside. And they have like it's a very hush-hush kind of world. And there was like a TV show where there was a magician that would debunked a lot of those kinds of tricks. And he wore like a hood over his head and that's right. He didn't want to be exposed. Maybe that was just part of it. But no, it's definitely frowned upon. And you certainly could get blacklisted from what is already a pretty niche performing community.
I would say that's why Penn and Teller are household names, because they would show that you can be tricked by us and by other illusionists, Michael, and because this is how, sorry, I'm going to do that every time for the rest of my life, because that show is so important to me.
How much could a banana cost? I'm sorry. The show is just infinitely quotable and applicable. This is why you leave a note. Sorry, there's too many to list.
But I mean, so that's why they're important, because they would actually show you, like they do a trick with opaque cups, and then they would do the same trick with transparent cups so that you could see through and see what they were doing. But it's also why somebody like Randall James Zwinge, I don't know how to say it. Yeah, the James Randi, why he was so important, because he was attempting to show there are no, at least in his mind, there are no psychic powers, there are no spiritualism powers, there are no other powers, because I am sitting here offering $1 million to anybody that can prove it scientifically, and I'll give you $1 million. You just got to prove that you've got those powers, and it never happened. But still, I don't know. I'm just going back to that code, right? You don't want to show how tricks work, because it takes away from everybody's ability to pull those illusions off, to either make money and have a career, or just to keep a little magic in people's minds.
Yeah, you're blowing up the spot, basically, right? And also, just for a side note, I don't know about you guys. I completely agree with the amazing Randy's mission, objectively, but I found a lot of his bedside manner to be a little bit militant and unhelpful.
He's the guy with I'm thinking of the Amazing Jonathan, the guy with the headband. I don't know
with all the cocaine and magic.
Yeah, that's right. Who was the Amazing Randy?
It's the skeptic, James Randi.
Oh, of course. Yeah, we all have signed Simpsons-fied cartoon images of him on our walls that some listener or a colleague or somebody sent us. That's pretty cool. I'm sorry, I should look more into the Amazing.
It was Tyler.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
Yeah, so thank you, Tyler. And we also, again, I just want to say, like, I know his bedside manner, Randy's, wasn't for everybody, but the mission is noble. That's the main takeaway. And what he's trying to do, and what he spent most of his life doing, was attempting to prevent people from being manipulated or bilked into further heartbreak and tragedy. So there is something noble to that. And to this day, I think his estate continues with the offer, right? To this day, no one has successfully proven something to the standards set out in that challenge or that proposition. Going back to the fall of spiritualism and the fall of ectoplasm as a popular craze, there was a book that broke the medium code. It was published anonymously at first. It was called Revelations of a Spirit Medium. And just like the books by, or the performances by the masked magician or Penn and Teller, this revealed behind the scenes, easily reproducible methods for creating a whoosh, whoosh, ghost. And the psychic industry in that rarefied spiritual air, they were super pissed about it. This was not a good look for them, so much so that they bought up almost all the original copies of that book and they destroyed them en masse. The larger, they censored it. They tried to erase it from history because this was their livelihood. The public only learned about this when these two researchers, Eric Dingwall, real last name, and Harry Price, managed to save. They found one copy. They saved it from destruction. They republished it widely. And that's when the public learned, hey, maybe that's really not, my mother has passed away, or my child that I lost, or my spouse, or whatever. And the tide turned.
Yeah. If you have time and you're interested in this stuff, look more into Harry Price. There is an amazing article that goes into his 1930s research attempting to use X-rays specifically to investigate psychic mediumship and this kind of thing where there's either ectoplasm created or a spirit that manifests, and using X-rays to try and prove that the medium may or may not actually have something inside their person, right, that they are using to fool everybody. Really great stuff. You can find an article on the website for the Science and Media Museum. It's called Spirit Photography and the Occult, Making the Invisible Visible.
And if you want to see some kind of gonzo fiction in this regard, if you're a fan of graphic novels at all, please check out BPRD and Hellboy, which goes deep into the spiritualism movement or uses it as inspiration for some crazy adventures. I say crazy adventures, hijinks. It's deep stuff. It's maybe not appropriate for kids all the time.
I was also going to suggest a movie that came out pretty recently that I thought was pretty good. I think it's called Late Night with the Devil, where it's like about like an exorcism that takes place on a late night show. But there is a James Randi-esque character who is there, like trying to talking crap about the whole thing all along the way. So it's very 70s kind of vibes, and I think it's good. If anyone is interested in seeing that.
I mean, I'm cartoonishly in the demographic for things like that.
Yeah, but I thought it was well done and it was entertaining and it's actually got some humor in it, but it's definitely a bit of a dark exploration of these types of things.
And so with the fall of spiritualism, which we'll explore in a later evening, the tide turned and the wave of belief in ectoplasm never fully returned to the shore of the public zeitgeist. So with all this in mind, we can say the following. Yes, ectoplasm is real, but that answer depends entirely on what we mean by ectoplasm. A basic part of cell structure? For sure. An agglomeration of mundane materials exhibited under specific physical and psychological conditions? Abso-frickin-lutely. The physical traces of ghosts? I don't know.
I haven't seen any. I've seen lots and lots of weird photographs of cheesecloth.
Yeah. And of course, that is unless you, listening tonight, fellow conspiracy realist, unless you happen to have inarguable physical proof of spirits visiting this realm from beyond the grave and leaving tangible evidence behind. If so, we would love to learn more. Reach out, tell us, show it to us. We can't wait to share it with the world. Or just let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your stories about encounters with mediums and psychics. And we'd love to hear where you fall on the spectrum of spiritualism and skepticism. We try to be easy to find online.
That's right. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy on XFKA, Twitter, and on YouTube with video content coming at you on the regular. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Do you want to call us and tell us what you think? Call 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a voicemail system. When you choose to call, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know at some point in the message if we can use your name and message on the air. And if you've got more to say than can fit in a 3-minute voicemail, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
The entities that read every single piece of correspondence we receive. When you send a message into the void, we can all see it. And we all know that sometimes the void writes back, be aware, yet unafraid. Tell us what's on your mind. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.